When I turned 29, my boyfriend at the time and I split up, and I couldn't wait to get out of our apartment and move into a house of my own. And even though the place I found was small, I finally managed to do it. It was a tiny one-bedroom house with a large basement for storage and laundry, and at first, it seemed like everything I could dream of. Little did I know that the home's basement would turn my dream house into a house straight out of my nightmares. Things weren't off to a great start when I first moved in. It must have only been there for about 3 days when I went downstairs to do my first load of laundry in my new home. It was just after dinner, around 7 at night, and I made sure to turn the light on as soon as I made it to the bottom of the basement stairs. As soon as it was lit up, I took a quick look around. I couldn't help but feel uneasy. But at first, I was pretty sure it was only because I was in a basement by myself. I figured that anyone would be freaking out, but that was when I saw it. Sitting on the floor right beneath the small window at the top of the basement that sat lawn level and looked outside was a small piece of paper. I felt my stomach turn. Once again, I looked around to make sure that nobody was in the basement with me, and then I walked over and picked up the piece of paper. I dropped it back to the floor almost immediately after reading the first line, which had my name in it. I frantically looked around, afraid that I was being watched, but eventually picked up the note and began reading it. Chills ran through my body as I read the words. "Dear Maggie, I'm glad to see you're in good health. You can always feel safe within these walls, for I'll be here with you. Signed, XOXO." I looked up towards the window that I was certain it came from, and then back over my shoulder. That night, I decided to stop doing laundry and ran right upstairs to call my parents, who helped me move. I asked them if they left me a note in the basement, and they just laughed because they thought I was joking. When I realized it wasn't them, I got really concerned and told them what happened. But they said that it was probably just a note that fell out of my clothes or something that my ex had left me. I did my best to believe them, but that night I had a hard time sleeping. Eventually, the morning came and I decided to do laundry in the daytime, but I didn't make it all the way down the stairs before turning back around. As soon as I could see the floor underneath that window, I saw that there was another note waiting for me. That time, I didn't even pick it up. I just decided to call the police right away. Officers were sent over to my house to check it out, but other than walking around my yard and looking for anything that might tell them who was leaving these notes for me, they couldn't do anything. They suggested that I get someone to stay with me, and then went on their way and left the note behind. After they left, I decided to read it for myself. This time the letter was a bit longer and said, "Dear Maggie, thank you for accepting me into your home and heart. I saw you get scared before, but I promise you have nothing to worry about. I am here for you always. Signed, XOXO." Shivers went down my spine, and I decided that I couldn't stay in the house that night. I went inside and called my older brother and asked him if I could stay the night at his house while I figured things out. But before he could answer, I heard a noise that made me drop my phone. At the time, I was standing in the kitchen, and directly beneath me, I could hear the sound of someone walking around as if someone was in my basement. I decided that it was time I figured out what was going on. I slowly made my way over to the basement door and opened it, and before I could even start heading downstairs, I saw the legs of someone walking over to the floor near the window. I was frozen in terror as I watched them kneel down and place the note on the floor. I tried to be quiet as I stepped away from the basement door, but the floorboard creaked as I stepped backward. I let out a loud shriek as the man in my basement turned around and noticed me. But before anything could happen, I ran as fast as I could outside. Thankfully, my neighbors heard my screaming and came out to help me. It wasn't long before the police were back at my house looking around, only this time they managed to find something. Or should I say, someone. As one of the officers walked around the basement, he noticed that there was a small wooden panel that looked like it was slightly shifted from the wall. And as soon as he got close enough, he was attacked by a man who had been hiding in the basement walls. He overpowered the first cop, but the other 3 officers managed to arrest him. When asked who he was, he wouldn't give them his name. All he kept saying was, "I wasn't going to hurt her." According to the officer, before I bought the house, it had been vacant for a while, and it was likely that the man was homeless and staying there when I bought it. They even think he was walking around my house while I was asleep or not around, which to this day freaks me out. I ended up moving out of that house within the next month. I just couldn't take the thought of someone living in my basement without me knowing it. I'll never forget that night. I had lived in my house at that time for about 2 years, and at that time specifically, I was living by myself. For the most part, I loved that house, though I was never really fond of the basement, and for good reason. That night, it was raining outside and I had gotten home from a late night shift. As soon as I stepped outside of my car, I felt like there was something wrong in my gut. I walked up to my front door and went to unlock it, but noticed that it was already open. I thought about it for a minute before walking inside because I was almost positive that I locked it before leaving. This put me even more on edge than I already was, but I knew that I had to go inside. I walked in, and normally I would have taken the time to take my shoes off, but I wanted to make sure that no one had broken in while I was at work. So right away, I started looking around. I walked into the dark living room and flipped on the light switch, but there wasn't any sign of anyone being there. I did the same thing in the kitchen and the bedroom before finally feeling like I could relax. As soon as I sat down on the couch to take my work boots off though, I stopped myself and then looked over to the hallway as I realized that the basement door was open. I didn't do that, I thought to myself. I never leave that door open. It makes it hard to keep the upstairs at a good temperature. I slowly stood up and started walking over to the basement, and I peeked in, wondering if I was going to see anything. It was too dark to see beyond the base of the stairs, though. I tried to force myself to walk down the stairs, but there was something in the back of my head telling me not to do it. That's when I decided to call out. "Hello? Is anyone down there?" I hollered. There was no response, but still, I knew that something wasn't right. "If someone's down there, you better say something before I come down and get you." As soon as I finished that sentence, I felt myself start getting a bit shaky. And at that moment, there was a flash of lightning that illuminated the house around me through the windows. That includes the small windows that lined the upper walls of the basement. I almost fell backward when the lightning flashed, revealing a face at the bottom of the stairs. It was only for a brief second, but while the basement was lit up, I unmistakably saw a man standing at the base of the stairs, looking right back up at me. I instinctively took a step back, but before I could say or do anything, the man rushed out of the darkness and up the stairs in my direction. I tried to brace myself, but with full force he rushed me and slammed me against the wall. I fell to the floor, but tried as fast as I could to get back up. It was no use though, as the man grabbed me and forced me down the basement stairs. I tried to stop myself from rolling, but I couldn't help it as I was tossed down the stairs. My head smacked against the hard concrete floor and I rolled onto my side as I looked up the stairs. For a brief second, I saw the man looking back at me as he slammed the basement stairs closed with him on the other side. I tried to get up, but my head was pounding and I couldn't really see much. The only light in the basement came from the brief flashes of lightning outside, and in those moments, I could see the small puddle of blood from my head wound. As I was laying there in the darkness, I could hear whoever it was in my house upstairs tossing everything around as if they were looking for something valuable. After a few minutes of laying there, I started to be able to think a bit more clearly. And even though I couldn't get up, that didn't mean I couldn't move my arms. I slowly rolled myself over enough to reach into my pocket and pull out my cell phone. The screen was cracked after the fall, but thankfully it still worked. I called 911 and the dispatcher told me that police and ambulance were on the way. It took about 10 minutes before I saw the flashing lights, and in that moment, I heard the unmistakable creaking sound of the back door being thrown open as my assailant attempted to run away. They managed to make it out of my yard, but the officers managed to find him 2 houses over, hiding in the neighbor's shed. Once they found him, they saw that he had a few chains and watches that I owned, as well as my car keys, as if he's going to steal my car as well. That was the only time I've ever not felt safe in my own home, and I hope it never happens again. Growing up, I always considered myself lucky to have a decent-sized house. However, it didn't come without its flaws, and I'm talking about the basement. At first, I thought the basement would be a super cool place for my friends and me to hang out, sort of like my own bat cave. But I quickly learned that it wasn't a place I wanted to spend any more time than I had to. It started when I was about 7 years old. We had lived in the house for almost a year by that point, when out of nowhere, something strange started happening. It started in the middle of the night one day when everyone in my house was woken up by a loud slamming sound. I sat up in my bed but didn't dare to move as I waited to see if I heard anything else. That was when I heard my dad call out for me and ask if I was all right. I responded to let him know that I was fine and asked him what happened, but I couldn't quite hear his answer. At that point, I was curious and got out of my bed and walked over to the hallway and stuck my head out. That was when I saw my mom and dad standing in front of the basement, looking down the stairs. They saw me and told me to go back to bed, so that's what I did. However, this wasn't the last time we were woken up by that same noise. We quickly figured out that something was causing the basement door to unlatch and its weight was causing it to swing open and slam into the wall. But what we couldn't figure out was how it was unlatching. What's even stranger was that on a few occasions when I was woken up by the basement door opening, we noticed that the basement light had been turned on. But for some reason, it was way dimmer than it normally was. But anytime my dad went down and checked to see if anyone had broken it, the basement was always empty. I told my friends at school about what was happening, but none of them believed me. So I did what anyone my age would do. I dared them to sleep over and spend the night in the basement with me. I admit that I was probably the most scared out of all of us that night, but I didn't like that my friends thought I was lying. That night, we all met at my house and set up our sleeping bags in the basement with some snacks and board games to keep us busy while we waited. The hours passed and one by one my friends started to get tired. Not me though, I was too on edge. They all got ready to lay down, and as my friends started to fall asleep, all I could do was look over to the stairs and wait. I didn't have to wait long though. My eyes widened as I noticed a bit of movement in the corner of the room that was behind the basement stairs. I could feel goosebumps crawling up my arms as I realized that there was a person coming out from underneath the stairs and making their way around and up them. I nearly gasped as they stopped at the base of the steps and turned to look at me and my friends as if they were trying to check if we were sleeping or not. I wanted to scream for my parents, but I was too scared. The person made their way up the stairs and they opened the door before slowly walking out of the basement and closing it behind them. Only they didn't close it enough for the door to latch. About 20 seconds later, we all heard the slamming of the door hitting the wall at the top of the stairs, waking up my friends around me. I thought that no one was going to believe me this time, but it turned out that my friend Jacob was still awake and he asked me if I saw the person come out from my staircase. As soon as my parents came to the top of the stairs, I found the courage to call out for them. They came running down the stairs and Jacob and I explained to them what we saw, and that was when my dad discovered a small cubby behind the staircase that we didn't know about. My dad ended up setting up a camera in the basement to catch whoever it was that was doing it, and it turned out to be one of his coworkers that had recently lost their house. He had apparently been breaking in while my parents were at work and sleeping under the stairs before leaving while we were all sleeping. The man had actually been over to our house before when we first moved in, which was when my dad thinks he got the idea to sleep there. Needless to say, he was arrested for breaking and entering, but he didn't try to fight the charges.